Welcome to the Uncommon Trauma Podcast, sponsored by Frontline Crisis Response Solutions and powered by PsychSpeak Media. Today, our topic is giving yourself permission to grieve your own way. Let's get right into the show. We have another survivor of suicide loss in the studio to share a little bit about her journey. Thank you, Mary, so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Can you just share a little bit about who you lost,
Mm-hmm.
who you love, and just a little bit about your story and your journey so far?
Okay. My son Jacob passed away in June of 2020. We lost him to suicide. He'd been struggling with, mental illness as far as like depression, anxiety, and substance abuse issues. So it'd been, it was a road leading up to it even. And it was a hard few years and miss him terribly. It's being there at the beginning of the pandemic was kind of interesting because you really didn't know what to do because you were like, this is completely, not only is that type of loss uncharted territory, but so is the event that you're living in with the closure. So, it wasn't the traditional family comes or neighbors come and that kind of, it was just like alone at the very beginning with it. So we really had to rely on each other and had to do a lot of thinking and grieving on our own until things were kind of cleared up and then we could get out and mix the people again.
Yeah. Are you willing to go back just a little bit for me and just share what that was like, maybe that first year?
Well, that's kind of a good question because I'm not really sure. Because apparently a lot of things that I think I remember a certain way have been brought to my attention that they didn't happen that way in that first year. So the first year was a fog. It just seems like it was a fog. And it still does. Yeah, I don't know if that'll change. Maybe that's just my mind's way of protecting me. But it was just difficult to not be able to have people around us. But at the same time, it was almost kind of a relief because we didn't have to go out in public. We didn't have to go to our jobs. We had that grace that a lot of people don't get when they have a loss like this. So it was a good and a bad thing.
Yeah. So you had the time to go through the grief process, but it was a different type of grieving. Because when we talk about society and what we were used to prior to the pandemic, it looked quite a bit differently with everybody being locked down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I love your honesty because I think a lot of people can relate to the fog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And really not knowing anything else other than you're just putting one foot in front of the other.
Mm-hmm.
You're breathing one breath every moment.
Very much.
And just trying to do the best that you can.
And I still, still have days that are like that as far as, memories hit you from out of nowhere sometimes and it can kind of take you back for a few minutes, but, definitely not like it was in that first year.
Yeah.
Because that first year was just definitely very foggy and I'm glad I'm not in that fog anymore. And I think being involved in support groups, going to therapy, just talking to people, being very open with my story has been my part of my healing, and my relationship with God what's carried me through. And I just don't feel like there's any shame. So why shouldn't I talk about it? I mean, if he died of any other reason, it would be okay for me to talk about him. So I consider this just like dying from any other disease. Yeah. It's so if I do start to feel that little bit of like you're kind of embarrassed or that shame or you don't know how they're going to react, I just remind myself it's just like losing them to something else as far as you should be allowed to talk about it. There's no shame in it.
Yeah. Well, I like to say a lot of times the ending of a person's life, especially if it's by suicide, overshadows the life that they lived prior.
Absolutely.
So can you share a little bit about your son, who he was to you, and the good stuff that, I think we all want to be able to get back to.
Yes.
But can you tell us who he was?
Jacob was, oh, he was my heart. Even the moment he was born, and our eyes connected, we always had a very special bond. And so he was silly. He unfortunately only worried about in the moment, so he was kind of daring and didn't really think about down the road or consequences. So he tended to get into mischief a lot, even as a toddler, and then especially as you don't want a teenager thinking like that. Just, oh, I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. But he was kind of like that. But he was loving. He was a hugger. He was a cuddler, and he was very compassionate. He had compassion for people. He didn't like to see even if it wasn't people he knew, he didn't like to see anybody hurting or anybody being bullied or taken advantage of. It really bothered him. And so, that would sometimes get him into a little bit of trouble. But that's good trouble, right? I mean, if you're going to get in trouble over something, that's a good thing. But when, as a little boy, you just never knew what he was going to be into next, what he was going to be up to.
He kept you on your toes.
Oh, he did. And he was funny. He was so funny. He had a great sense of humor, and he was silly. So he always made you laugh. And that sometimes was a problem in school because he loved to make people laugh. So he'd get in trouble in class because he was very smart, and he'd get bored, and then he'd just want to make people laugh. But he loved the holidays. He was, even as a grown man, became like a little kid at the holidays. Loved all the food, especially the family being all together at one time. And he'd still be the first one up on Christmas morning, no matter how old he got. And as the siblings got older too, they were like, "No, we're going to sleep in." He's like, "No, no, no, we got to go, we got to go." And that didn't change. He was like that up until the year before he passed.
Thank you so much for sharing that about him. And I think sometimes going back to the beautiful memories allows that light that we want other people to see to actually shine through about our loved ones. Can you share a little bit about the progression? So you said he was really kind of a risk taker. He was an adventurer. Was there anything that you noticed that that became difficult for him as life began to go
on? That's a good question. It's hard to describe. I think the difficulty he had difficulty in school because he was bored, and he didn't really like conforming to a square. He was definitely a more out of the box type of a personality. So he really struggled with that. Yeah, yeah, definitely no rules. So he struggled with that, and so going into intermediate and then into middle school, just like was all teenagers, it's a very trying time, and unfortunately, they're not under your wing all the time. Like when they're toddlers, you're choosing their friends, you're choosing where they go, what they do, and then they get into the older grades, and you have to be a little more patient and just pray a lot about what they're exposed to.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you feel would have been, I guess, a gift or helpful for you to know now that you've been through this loss process? Anything that you think would have been helpful in the beginning?
Probably the support groups, being able to find the support groups, because that was difficult, especially it was a pandemic. So if there were any, they were all online, and I really needed to be in person.
Yeah.
I tried to do the Zoom type ones, and it just isn't the same. You don't tend to share like you do if you're face to face with people. So that's something that when I found the source and started exploring and finding, I had to be persistent.
Yeah.
I couldn't just sit back and wait for somebody to knock on my door and say, "Hey, we've got this support group for you." So I had to be persistent. And So I maybe would have liked to have had that earlier than I did. But there's, extenuating. It wasn't just me not looking, it was also with the pandemic. So it was kind of unavoidable. But that's definitely something I would have loved to have had earlier because that's been invaluable. Just being able to be back in church with and in my groups with my friends and be able to talk about spirituality and everything that's going on in your lives, and then the support groups, especially when you can find something like survivors of suicide, because you have a freedom in that group that you don't in other groups because you're afraid of shock value. Um, and maybe like the first meeting, you're still kind of like reserved or whatever, but then you say some things or you hear other people talking. And I know the first one I went to, I was like, I've had this thing in my head and I haven't said it to anybody. It's been in my head. And I feel like it's not a good thing to be thinking. And so I brought it up at the first group I went to and got immediate nods. And oh, yeah, yep, completely understand that. Went through that myself. It's like, oh, okay. So I'm not, I'm not a horrible person thinking these dark thoughts or whatever. It's normal. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gone to a support group and been brave enough to voice what was going on with myself. And because it was a group of other survivors, I felt I could do that and not be really upsetting or scaring someone.
Yeah. So the common denominator of church, family, support groups is connection,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think after a loss, what I've heard other people, everything in their being wants to go inward
Mm-hmm.
and to not necessarily want to be around people. Number one, you don't have energy. Number two, it's hard for other people to be in the space with you because then they say stupid stuff. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. No.
So sometimes those events also poke on memories, right? And so when you're with family, when you're with loved ones, when you're doing what your normal routine has been, there's a really stark reminder that things are not the same. But having that type of connection, specifically with the survivor of suicide loss group, you are among people who just get it. Mm-hmm. They understand, depending Absolutely. On where they are on their journey. You don't feel as alone.
Absolutely. And alone in so many ways. I mean, not just being there talking with people, but just that alone. You're not alone in your head. You're like, okay, this isn't just happening in my head and in my reality. This is a common denominator with anybody who's been through a trauma loss. Yeah. It's a different animal altogether. And I did grief share after my mom passed away, and I got a lot out of it. It was a great group. And luckily, because I had done it already, I knew that was not going to be the appropriate setting for myself, because these people have, their loss is huge to them. And then you have somebody come in and has something shocking and overwhelming, like what happened with my son, Jacob, and I feel like you take away from them, or you make them feel that their loss is less than because it wasn't as traumatic or. Yeah. And that's not true. I mean, I've had people say that to me before. It's like, oh, well, yours is so much worse. It's like, that's relative. I mean, the year before, the worst that had happened to me was losing my mom and dad. And then, so, when I lost my mom, that was significant for me. But definitely the loss of Jacob was different. So I knew I needed a different group. It wasn't going to be the same kind of group that was going to make me feel like I could just talk and be open and honest. And like I said earlier, is that for me has been the best part of healing, is talking about it and talking about the issues with people. Then I don't feel like he's being forgotten, and I don't feel like it's being forgotten what drove him to where he went with his depression and his anxiety. And I don't know how to describe it. It's just.
Yeah.
the hamster's running.
Well, sometimes there's just no words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we talk about suicide, it is a unique type of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And describing the intensity of the emotions, we talk a lot about the waves in the groups that
Mm-hmm.
I facilitate, because they do come. Sometimes they are itty bitty baby waves, and sometimes they are mountainous, crashing,
Yeah.
hard waves, and it's like, man, it puts your face in the sand, and it's hard to find your way up out of the muck. But when you find yourself in that place where it's like, it's just, I don't have words, it really is that deep.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder what you've personally noticed, because you made a distinction between the loss of your mom and your dad. There is a difference between losing a parent or both parents and losing a child.
Mm-hmm.
What have you noticed just in your own journey, those differences?
Well, especially with your child, you know, you're so full of woulda, coulda, shouldas. You know, and like you know, the moment you hold them or the moment you're pregnant with them, every instinct in you is to protect them and to have them, you know, feel happy and soothed. And so, you know, that's what you try to do. And when they get depressed, like he was, and they have that anxiety, and then they turn to substances, and you're like, well, you know, why? What did I do wrong? You know, what did I not give him? What did I, or give him too much of? Or, you know, you go down all those roads, and that's gotten much easier. Um, Now I cut myself off faster, or remind myself that it's not my fault. But it's, you know, that's a very difficult part of the loss, especially with suicide, because there is so many questions. I mean, I knew where Jacob was because he was in a lot of mental and physical pain, and you know, so I was trying everything I could possibly think of to get him to grasp onto it, and um, so that's, you know, there's a desperation when it's your child, and then you have the sense of failure, or um, you know, yeah, a lot of questions. What, you know, why couldn't I have stopped that from happening?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And the questions can be endless. And I just want to encourage our listeners. I know that in all of the books about grief, there are, if any, that talk about this investigative phase. I talk about the investigative phase a lot, because it is this unique part of suicide, loss, grief, and even violent loss, really, where you ask these questions that don't have answers.
Exactly.
And not only that, you go back through the data, right? The data are the voicemail messages, it's the videos, it's the text messages, it's the movie reels that are in your head of moments, be it holidays, be it birthdays, be it I dropped him off here and what happened after that. All of these things that just kind of they grip you, and it's hard for you to just release it until that grief period, that portion of the grief cycle ends, and it's like, okay, I'm done now, for now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with, you know, the other losses I've had with my mom, my dad, and other family members, um, it was very hard on me. They were a big part of my life, but I didn't have those questions.
Yeah.
I didn't have that sense of, you know, maybe I could have changed that. Maybe I could have. I mean, of course, you know, you always kind of do with things, but you know, with losing someone to suicide, whether I think it's your child or a friend or a spouse, it just leaves this gaping hole of, you know, what could I have done? You know, what did I not pay attention to? What did I not intervene sooner, or, you know, on? So that's that's the rough one, and I think that's the part of grief that you really have to give yourself a lot of grace. And that part to me gets easier the more I talk about him, and the more I talk about the issues surrounding his death and how it affects so many people. And you hear other people's stories, and you're like, okay, well, they were a together family too, and yet they went through the same experience. So it's not that I was a horrible parent or a terrible mom or wasn't supportive enough. So I don't know if you ever really get over questioning yourself like that about the woulda, coulda, shouldas, but I think that they're less haunting when you're in that fog, especially that first year. It's just you can't. I felt like I couldn't organize thoughts. I mean, it was just everything was overwhelming. Just going to the grocery store. I couldn't even go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
It was
Talk
over
a little
a
bit
year.
about that.
Yeah.
Why couldn't you go to the grocery store?
Well, the grocery store was everything in there was a reminder. His favorite candy bar, his favorite cookies, his favorite cracker, his favorite dinner, all those things were just right in my face. And especially towards the last couple months of his life, he wasn't able to really eat or drink anything. So we were trying to find anything he could eat without being in pain or keep down to get some nutrition. And so I would spend that time at the grocery store just kind of looking at things and being like, well, maybe I'll try this or maybe I'll try that. So being in the grocery store was very difficult. And it was over a year before I could go into the grocery store. And then I had to go with my husband at first. And then now I do okay. I'm all right with it, but I still don't enjoy it. No, I dread going to the grocery store. I guess I'm probably just worried that feeling's going to hit me again. But it doesn't. I just try to concentrate on what I'm there to get. But that didn't, in that first year or so, that didn't help either. It's just like immediately when I walked into the grocery, and I could go to the mall, I could go to other public places, so it wasn't being around people. It was being in the grocery store.
Well, it was that intimate reminder,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it for our listeners, it may not be the grocery store for you.
Right.
It may be driving down a certain street. It may be
I have
going
that too.
into a restaurant. These trigger zones
Yes.
that hijack your brain and your body because trauma has a way to push on the memories that have been recorded on your brain, your body, and your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know anyone that doesn't know what that immediate shock feels like when you first get that call or you first get the news. It completely shifts your life.
Oh yeah, it just completely shatters you. I mean, everything you've known is just turned upside down because life will never be the same again.
Yeah. But in those moments, your brain is recording everything, right? And so after time has passed, maybe it's in the first year, maybe it's in the first 2 years, you still entering in and out of these places. It's poking on that trauma, even if you're not paying attention to it. It can even be the weather change.
Yeah, I've been somewhere and had a panic attack and just kind of started doing my breathing, and my husband is like, well, what's wrong? I'm trying to keep myself from having a full blown panic attack, and well, what are you having a panic attack about? And I'm like, I don't know. And it was really hard for him because he doesn't suffer from them. It was really hard for him to understand that I could be having such a strong reaction, but not have a cause, or a known cause.
Well, there was a cause.
Yeah,
it just
but
wasn't.
There wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't evident. It wasn't in front of me as far as I can say. Oh, well, I saw this and it reminded me, or I saw that and it reminded me. Just it's just out of nowhere. It
just the way the wind blew.
Yeah. So grace and self-care are extremely important.
Yeah. What have you found to be, I say, non-negotiable, for your own self-care? What are the things that I have to maintain this and be consistent to stay well?
Definitely my church and Bible study and the support groups.
Yeah.
Those are my consistency now, right now. Yeah, those are what keep me I don't want to say sane, but that's what keeps me from staying in my bedroom. Because it is difficult, especially when I first started going back to something like Bible study, because everybody there kind of knows, but they don't really know, and they don't know what to ask or what to say. And so a lot of times when I'm in something like that, I try to address the elephant in the room, immediately. And did that with family the first time I was around family after Jacob died. Made it very clear. Look, the more you talk about him, the better it is for me. Yes. And that may not be for everyone.
Yeah.
My husband, I'm not sure that that's the best thing for him. For me, the more you talk about him, the more we laugh about all the silly things he did and trips we had or whatever, it reminds you of that happy time, that reminds you of a time that brought you joy with that person. Yeah. And keeps that going instead of, feeling like you're always in your head about the loss. So I try to kind of address that when I'm around people. It's like, you're not going to say anything to offend me. Don't worry about it. Just, feel free to ask me whatever you need to ask me, and just know that you aren't going to have the magic words to make it better. So don't worry about trying.
Well, that's good.
It's you aren't going to be able to. The best thing you can do is just ask if you're curious. Ask me.
Yeah. So transparency, honesty, directness, not being around the bush. I think a lot of times, I'll say over time, the stigma surrounding suicide loss and mental health, it is starting to decrease. It still exists.
Yeah.
Depending on the generation of the people you're engaging with. To where sometimes it's hard to have those conversations because they just don't know what to do, or it's too overwhelming, or they have kind of pushed it so far on the back burner that it's to them not a big deal.
Yeah. And see, for me now, 3 years out, I can be in those groups now and not feel like I'm actually not there. Mm-hmm. But that first year to 2 years, it was very hard to be in a group like that because everybody's talking about their lives and their vacations are going to be going on, or all that day-to-day stuff at work. And to me, that stuff was so not important. I didn't care about any of that stuff. I was like, yeah, oh, good for you. I don't care about any of that. Yeah. That was definitely the hard part in the beginning. And I think the more I learned to be open and to talk to people or give myself the grace to exit a situation because I'm not comfortable, that helped a lot because I didn't feel like I had to force something. Yeah. So I just had been trying to really, for the self-care, just really let myself do what I need to do. So if I need a day in my room, I take myself a day in a room. Yeah. And just don't do 2 or 3, 4 days. You don't want to, then you want to be getting yourself out there because it does, I know for me, it very quickly become where I don't want to leave my room.
Well, it becomes what I call the pit.
The pit.
And then guess what? When you're in the pit, everybody kind of knows you're in the pit, and then they have to send in reinforcements to kind of throw the hook in there and pull you out. Like, you gonna eat dinner tonight?
We got chocolate cheesecake.
Right. Hey, got you a chocolate shake. Chocolate just does it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you have started to integrate life with this grief process. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to now that help honor Jacob's memory?
I think this year, for the first time, I'm actually a little excited about the holidays. First year, of course, I didn't even want to acknowledge that they were happening. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to engage in it. And then after that, it was hard to do anything we'd done traditionally because it just reminded me he wasn't there. And I think now I still feel like we kind of need to change little things here and there just to kind of have some new traditions. But I feel like we can be honoring him by still engaging in it because he loved it.
Yeah. So
he would be very sad to know I wasn't doing it anymore because it made me miss him. So now I'm trying to approach it with this is a good thing. This is something that would have made him very happy because that's when he was happy, was during these times. So that should make me happy to be there. not sad to be there. So that's one thing I'm feeling now that is exciting, because it's kind of a little breath of life that I wasn't feeling for a long time.
Well, that's good. That's a good marker for progress, right? And so, really paying attention to the things that are necessary for our own wellness during certain seasons to just say,
Hmm.
okay, I'm not in a good place to do that.
Hmm.
And that's okay. You don't need anybody else's permission. You don't need anybody else's approval for being,
Yeah.
for needing to step back away, from things that feel too heavy or feel like they're too
Hmm.
much. But you're a testament to those opportunities eventually maybe opening back up,
Hmm.
right? Internally, emotionally, and
Hmm.
just having this level of readiness to do it.
I think when I gave myself permission to not have to do any specific thing, because there is nothing normal about it, right? In other deaths, you might have a ritual you follow as far as visitation services and that kind of thing. And this is a completely different. You go into this moment of shock, and you're like, I don't think I'm ever going to come out of this. I'm going to sit in this bubble of shock for the rest of my life. And the more like I said, support groups, therapy, being active in your community, those things are what keep me, I think, growing in the direction of being able to not have Jacob's suicide be my life.
Yeah.
It is a part of something it's something that happened to our family. And it's not something that'll go away, but it doesn't have to be my life.
Yeah.
And that it's okay for me to engage in other things. And being around other survivors helps, because you do get feedback, and you do find out ways of self care. Somebody might say something, you're like, that is a great idea. I'm going to try that. Um, so that's another reason I think the support groups are so important, because we need to know that what we're feeling and what we're going through is not unusual, and that and then when you're around people that are 8 years into it or something, and you're like, oh my gosh, and they just seem, you would never know, that they'd had a
Yeah.
loved one commit suicide if you
You
didn't
just look at
right.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you're like, and whereas especially the first couple of years, I felt like it was on my face. It was on, I felt like I was wearing a sign around me. This woman's extremely unhappy and in grief, and don't talk to
Yeah.
her. So I don't quite feel like I have that veil over me anymore.
Yeah. Have you found a renewed energy um, to do anything in Jacob's honor?
Oh yes, yes, I definitely. Um, there's the walks, the suicide surviving the loss walks, and um, just being active in sharing my story. That's something that I've come across just just at work or wherever. When I share my story, people, then all of a sudden they're telling me their story.
Yeah.
And
Basically said you've given yourself permission to be open about your
mhm,
story,
yeah.
your journey, and that openness gives other people permission
Hmm.
to share their story and to share their journey. But the part about honoring him,
Hmm.
doing the walks, sharing your story, anything else coming up that you feel like maybe you weren't as open to in the beginning that you feel ready to do now?
Well, I know I'm volunteering for the loss team in Denton County, and the loss team was extremely important to me. Um, I didn't know it at the time, but when
Yeah.
they came and saw us after, they had to do a delayed visit because of COVID. So it was a few days afterwards that they came to my house, and um, but they left me all this information, and I didn't, necessarily read it or go through it all right then. But over, especially that first year, I kind of, read this or went through that, and they checked in on me too. Not push your, extended conversations, just checking in. Do you need anything? Um, And they are the ones that kind of gave me that avenue of, okay, there is stuff going on out there regarding this issue, and it's important to a lot of people. And so the more involved I get with that, I feel like I'm honoring Jacob. And then I know that at some point I want to be more involved in substance abuse with young people, and how they're using that for their anxiety and their depression. And then it also causes it such a terrible circle. But then the things that are being done to help them that aren't really helpful, like putting them on Suboxone and methadone, um, that isn't necessarily the right thing for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think our programs, need some revitalizing. And I don't know that I'll be able to go in there and just change things up, but it's anything gets a ball rolling, and you plant a seed, and you don't know where that seed might go.
Yeah. So you have a heart for advocacy.
I do.
And a heart for changes in systems, but also specifically, I heard you say substance abuse. So
yeah, and I haven't been too involved in that yet, because I do still have a lot of anger about the lack of help we're getting.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So I don't want to come across as an angry, bitter mother that's trying to find blame for her sons. I want them to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
When I do go down that road. So I know that at some point so I keep that in the front of my mind too, is that's somewhere down the road. I don't know yet. God hasn't put it in my path yet. He's put other things in my path that I didn't know were going to be there. So, like being on the lost team, and they did a candlelight vigil not that long ago in Flower Mound. That was beautiful. We all brought pictures and sat there as the sun went down and did a candlelight vigil, and those helped me honor Jacob, since we didn't get to have like a big funeral. And Jacob loved the lake. That was our vacations every year. Was going to the lake. We had a boat, and all summer long we were going to the lake, and he loved it. So it took us a while, but when we did finally do a memorial for him, we took his ashes, and we let them go at the lake, and we just had a very small, intimate group. But it took a while, because everybody wasn't trying to get all of us on the same page of readiness. I was ready, I think, long before my husband was. And so I just kind of had to be a little patient with that, and wait until the moment came across for us to be able to do that. But it was beautiful, and I was able to, I think, emotionally get a lot more out of it, because we didn't rush it. We didn't do it because this is what you're supposed to do, or somebody says, well, we haven't done that yet. There's no time frame. It's what works for you. It's what brings you comfort. And that's why we just did a small little intimate group too, because we rented a boat and went out, and we just, as people that were really close to him and loved him dearly and knew all of his struggles, and we were all able to, be there together, and we took a big picture of him, and we had it on the boat with us, and it was nice. It was really nice.
Yeah. Nobody grieves the same way.
No.
There is no book that says you have to do it a certain way. And I think you just being really authentic on paying attention to not only your needs, but the needs of your family, and knowing the right timing, is really key. We hear words like recuperation and healing and recovery for people who go through trials, tribulations, loss. But with suicide, loss and suicide, grief and suicide trauma, those words always have just kind of kept me like, do we really fully recover? And the reality is, um, I don't think you ever stop loving or missing your loved one.
No.
And so I like to use the word integration, because
that's a good word.
When you know that, hey, this is something my heart, when you love hard, you grieve hard. Yes, there is a process that you walk through, and you're on a journey, of being able to work through and do all of the micro pieces, of the grief process and the trauma process. But when you can start to, and this takes time, when you start to integrate the grief part with doing life, and it starts to feel like, I'm doing life pretty okay now.
Mm-hmm.
And I can go to concerts.
Yes.
I can go to church. I can go to
Take a trip.
go on vacation, right? I can do all of these things and not feel like that cloud or that fog or whatever that thing is also taking over that break time that you need to just.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing I had to learn through this process, because I was not very good at putting myself first when I needed to. Somebody told me, was describing selfish to me one time and saying, it's selfish, has this negative connotation, but it's not supposed to be a negative word. Sometimes we have to be selfish. Like the airplane, put your mask on before you put on your partner's mask.
Yeah.
And you hear all those analogies, but then going through the trauma that my family has really made me have to think about myself, because I had no choice. I had to think about myself above others around me, because there was no way I could do everything I usually did for everybody around me. I didn't have the physical or mental capacity to do it. And that was hard. That was really hard to accept, because I felt really guilty, like I'm letting these people down, or I should be able to do this, or provide this or whatever. But when I got to a point of integrating and realizing I can still balance the people I love around me, and then still do the things I need to do for myself, for self-care. Once I gave myself that true permission, then it became a lot easier, and I got more out of it, because I didn't sit there the whole time I was taking whatever time. So, like I said, if I have a day I need to stay in my room or in bed for the day, then I let myself do it. Sometimes I just need a day, and then or a moment, or with the people around you. My husband, he's going to grieve differently than I am. We both had different relationships with Jacob, so I can't expect him to be, and he can't expect me to be in the same place all the time. We're not going to. That's not reality. And by acknowledging that, it's really helped us not get at each other. And I think that's that's the problem with a trauma suicide type situation, is that everybody is you're so geared up, you're so fragile that your emotions are just, you don't even know what to do with them, and you want everybody to be where you are and to understand where you are.
And they want the same thing.
And they want the same thing. Yes, exactly. So that's definitely a challenge. But I think when you have that, when you start telling yourself that that's okay, that's the way it should be, or don't expect that. And sometimes I just take a deep breath and I do a woosah, and just let the moment go for a moment, and just, if whoever it is that's having their tantrum or whatever they're going through, just let them go. I don't have to fix it. And just like they can't fix it for me. Sometimes I just need to be able to go sit somewhere and cry. Sometimes I just need to be really ticked off. And then sometimes I need to just remember the joy and laugh and talk about him. And not everybody around me might be in that, like my husband might not be in that place at that moment. And so I try to be sensitive to that and not force a conversation where he's going to be uncomfortable. And by the same token, when something is going on around me that's making me uncomfortable, I've given myself permission to bow out, to go somewhere else, to remove myself from that situation and not feel guilty about it. So,
Yeah. So the moral of the story is, if you are, I'll say me too, so similar to any person who is on for everybody in your life, It is okay to take a break. It is okay to call a timeout on yourself.
It's okay to not be okay.
Yes. Oh, man. Give their props for that, whoever the author of that is.
Yeah.
Mary, I am so appreciative of
Thank you
being here tonight.
Me
Are
too.
there any final thoughts? Any put a pin in it moments that you just want to leave our listeners with to just remind them? You've given already some good stuff.
Just give yourself grace. It's so important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. This has been another episode of the In Common Trauma podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and follow. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.